I never really know how to start off with these videos, so I figured we'd go ahead and we'd start today off with a dad joke. So I hope most of you have seen or watched the Flintstones. And so what is the difference between Abu Dhabi and Dubai? Dubai doesn't like the Flintstones and Abu Dhabi do. It's pretty funny. Hopefully you get it. Anyways, that was pretty dumb. So this week we're actually now going to jump into Kansas history, and we are going to look a little bit at the indigenous people of Kansas, and then those first Europeans that arrived here in Kansas. And we are going to talk about how they impacted each other. Okay. So the first thing that you need to know is that you need to know that there were indeed people living here in Kansas well before the Spanish, the French, or the English or Americans arrived. Now, a lot of these groups all throughout the Americas are going to be relocated. A lot of them are going to die because of being exposed to diseases like smallpox. Um, Groups here in the US are going to be hunted. A lot of them are not going to be treated very well. They're going to be moved off of their traditional lands and moved thousands of miles away to other lands. And because of that, a lot of their history and a lot of their culture may have been lost. And today we do have an attempt um, to preserve that. Haskell Indian Nations University is a great example. They do powwows and trying to preserve uh, indigenous people's culture and way of life. So it's really important for you to remember and know that there were people that indeed lived here. Now, even though a lot of these people were moved around, especially the indigenous people that are native to Kansas are going to be moved, um, we have archaeological evidence that tells us that people have been here for thousands of years. Some of this are things simple like an arrowhead, but we also have archaeological evidence of permanent settlements where people built homes, where they farmed, and they lived in a community um, throughout, especially here in eastern Kansas. So, in looking at the indigenous people that lived here in Kansas, there are two types that we can break them down into. The first of these are village dwellers, and they lived in the eastern part of Kansas, so where we're at here today. And the reason we call them village dwellers is because these people built permanent settlements. They built homes where they farmed the land around where they lived, and they also hunted as well. Now, a lot of these villages, because they needed fresh water for farming, lived near rivers. So just like the Kansas River or the Kaw River, they lived next to these and they farmed. Okay. Now, some of the example of some of these indigenous people that were village dwellers are one group is who our state is named after, the Kansa or the Kaw. And they actually lived here in Lawrence all the way up into Atchison. They lived here in this northeast part of Kansas and they built permanent homes. They had villages and places where they lived. Um, Now, another group or another type of indigenous people that lived in Kansas are these nomadic tribes. And nomadic means that you don't stay in one place, that you move around. But they might stay in a spot maybe for a couple months, and then they would move around following the migration of animals. So these are largely in western Kansas. And some of these groups, like the Comanche, they didn't stay in Kansas because remember, Kansas didn't exist, it wasn't a state. But they might go as far south as the places like Texas and New Mexico following the animals. And they might go as far north as maybe like South North Dakota, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, following these migration of animals. So that way they could provide and take care of their families. And this wasn't something that they did all the time. They might stay in a spot for a little time and then they would move. So it's really important to remember that there were these two different types of indigenous people that lived in Kansas. Now that we've talked about the two different types of indigenous people that lived here in Kansas, we're going to look at those first European explorers that came to Kansas and how they interacted with these indigenous groups. Now, the first of these is the Spanish. Now, when we typically think of the Spanish, we think of places really far away from Kansas. We think of places like Mexico, Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico. But the Spanish did. They did come to Kansas and they came here exploring, and they're going to be the first Europeans to be here. Now, there was a gentleman, his name was Francisco Coronado, who was a famous Spanish explorer. And what he was trying to do is to explore places throughout the Americas, trying to find gold, silver, and other riches, so that way the Spanish could get more wealth. Well, as he was traveling and going on his journey, he was told about a place called Quivira. And some of you may have heard of Quivira before because there's a road in Kansas City and Johnson County called Quivira. But he was told of this city called Quivira, which was basically a city of gold. And so he went looking for Quivira. And eventually he comes, you can kind of see on the map, he comes and makes his way all the way to Kansas, into central Kansas, where he meets the Wichita. Now, some of you may think, oh, the Wichita, we have a city named Wichita. Well, this is where we get the name for our city. It's from this indigenous group of people called the Wichita. And when he arrives here, when he gets here, he realizes, wow, there is no gold, there's nothing. And he kind of turns around and goes all the way back. Now, something that's really important to remember about Francisco Coronado is, first of all, he's going to come here in 1541. Okay, so really long time ago, almost 500 years ago. And when he comes here, he is not going to treat the indigenous people very well at all. As a matter of fact, there are times when he would just come into a camp and they would actually take hostages and they would take people as slaves to carry their items that they were bringing with them. They did not treat the indigenous people very good at all. They were actually very cruel and mean to them. The second group that came more than 100 years later to explore the Kansas area were the French. Now, when we think of the French, we often think of places like in Canada, you know, Montreal, Toronto, those type of places. But the French also came and explored throughout most of what would become the Midwest part of the US. And there are a lot of places all throughout the Midwest that have French names. So places like Des Moines or St. Louis. Well, the French came here as well and they explored. Now, this French explorer who came here in 1724, I do not know how to say the first part of his name, so we're just going to say Bourgmont. He came to Kansas, and the reason he came to Kansas was because he wanted to establish a good relationship with the indigenous people that were here. He came here and he wanted to have a peace treaty, a treaty that would allow other French people that would come through the right to travel their land safely, but also to be engaged in trade, and also that they would just treat each other nicely. Now, Bourgmont, he not only did he speak French, because, he's French, but he also spoke other indigenous languages. His wife was an indigenous person. I forget what tribe she would be from. But when he came here, he treated the indigenous people very well. He was very nice to them. And he just wanted to have a fair and equal footing for them. And he knew that they could benefit by trading, that he could give them things like axes and guns and gunpowder, where in turn he could get things that he wanted, like furs and other things that he could take back with him to trade. And so the way that he treated, or the French treated indigenous people, was very different than how the Spanish treated indigenous people. Now that is all the information that I need to share with you that we are going to go over today. I know it's kind of brief, but we're trying to do these lessons with this continuous learning to be a little brief. So let me talk about the assignments that you are going to do this week. So the first one is going to be relative to the French and Spanish assignment. Now there are two PDFs in Google Classroom. Okay, one is going to be on the French, so you can see right here in the picture, this is what the first page of the French one's going to look like. There are 2 pages. They don't have a lot. It's kind of like that. And then you're going to have a Google Doc where you're going to answer 3 questions. Now, in this Read Kansas document, this part right here is just kind of like the narrative to tell you the story. Now, this brown part right here, this is the actual primary source. So this one right here is from Borgmont's journal that he wrote, okay? And then this other thing is about, so these are the primary sources. So in answering those 2 questions that you are going to see, or actually there's 3 questions, okay? One of the Spanish, one of the French, and one of them combined. So what you are going to do is you are going to have to cite the primary source. When I say citing the primary source, what I mean is that you are going to quote directly from that primary source text. So for this assignment, we have these little brown boxes like we talked about that are the primary source. And you are going to quote a part of it to back up your answer. Now let's talk a little bit more about this, okay? So citing sources. Now this is very similar to what we've done all year with the WRAP strategy. So we know we restate and we provide an answer, but the next part is important where we provide evidence or details to back up what we're doing. When we cite and quote our primary sources, we're strengthening our arguments, okay, or the point that we are trying to make. Now, the difference is, after we cite a source or we quote it, is we kind of need to explain what it is that it means or how it backs it up. Now, let me help you right here. Let me give you an example. So if we have a question, if the question was, what was Borgmont's mission? Well, looking at that little box that we had, those primary source, we knew that part of his mission was to make peace and establish good relationships with them, okay? So what we did is we restate the question we answer. We say Borgmont's mission was to establish peace with the various tribes. So that's our restate our answer, okay? Now we need to provide evidence and details. And so I found this one little quote. It said one with another, and I put, he thought that by establishing peace, they could trade with one another, okay? So when you quote it, you just want a little quote that's going to back up your answer, okay? And then my next sentence, it says, this shows that he has good intentions, okay? So I hope this example kind of gives you a sense of what you need to do with this assignment. So like I said, there's 2 questions, one on the French, one on the Spanish. You need to make sure that you cite the primary source material that you're given for each of those answers. And then the third question, which is on the French and the Spanish, you don't need to quote anything, you just need to provide an answer, but you should provide an answer using the WRAP strategy, okay? So that is our first assignment. The second assignment is going to be continuing with our COVID-19 pandemic journal entry, okay? So last week we wrote a little bit about ourselves in our first entry about when we first learned about COVID-19. This week you're going to have another response to a prompt. You're going to write another entry, okay? And I will have that prompt for you in Google Classroom. So the main document that you created, not the one that you attached in Google Classroom, so the one that's separate, you're going to write in your second entry into that main journal. And then what you're going to do is you're going to copy and paste that entry into the document that I'm providing you for the assignment in Google Classroom, okay? So remember, you're not going to attach the main document, you're just going to copy and paste what you write and put that in. Very simple, okay? Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions or need any help, please feel free to email me. I've been trying to get back to you guys as soon as possible, really quick. If you're having difficulties or anything, again, just send me an email. I do have office hours, and I'm available to help you. If my office hours don't work, just let me know of a time that works best for you, and we can go ahead and we can discuss matters then. I hope that you are all doing well. I hope everything is okay. I hope you guys know how much I miss you. And this is definitely an interesting time period that we're in. And I hope that you're all well and safe and healthy. Have a good day, guys. Bye.